I have huge admiration for the work over many decades before breakfast, lunch, tea and dinner that Michael Heseltine has done, not only on industrial policy and strategy, where, to be frank, he's been broadly right and was the silent voice in the wilderness in the past, was right then and right now, but also one of my other great passions, which is infrastructure planning, which actually I see as part of a proper industrial strategy for the country, where Michael was also a seminal force in the 90s and noughties, and we need to learn more from it. And his excellent report, which, as Francis said, is helping to turn the tide, but also builds on what Peter Mandelson started before the last election, new industries, new jobs. I hope we can make the basis of a new national consensus. And what he says in his introduction, which is that what we need to see is huge infrastructure demands and hungry institutional funds linked. We need to see excellence in industry, commerce and academia extended. And by industry, I take it to be what Francis was talking about, which is jobs at large, not just manufacturing industry, but that has an important part to play. And then England's cities, as Michael puts it, pulsing with energy, unleashed. We need all those things. But I want to begin, because we can operate at a very high level, by telling you three stories as to how tough a challenge this is going to be in all three of these respects. 2 days ago in the House of Lords, we had the second reading of the Growth and Infrastructure Bill. Now, the Growth and Infrastructure Bill was introduced by the government alongside the publication of Michael's own report. And it demonstrates, as nothing else can, quite how tough a challenge it's going to be to bring about this change in mentality that he was talking about. Michael says, and I quote in his report, about the need to unleash local creativity and leadership, that one of the biggest problems we have in this country, and I entirely agree, is, and I quote, at the first sign of trouble, central government wrests further powers back to the centre from local governments. At the same time, he says, and I would say as a result, the involvement of local business people in the governance of their communities has dwindled, and their energy and innovation has been lost. I completely agree. What does the Growth and Infrastructure Bill does? What does it do? It wrests a whole set of powers back to the centre from local government. Micro-powers, to an extraordinary degree, it gives the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government the power to second-guess every local planning authority in the country. It defines a category of quote-unquote failing planning authorities who are going to have their powers removed entirely, and Michael's old department, we would now call Communities and local government, is going to determine planning applications. Literally, we'll start determining individual planning applications. It gives every developer in the country the right to appeal against a local authority's own decisions in respect of Section 106 agreements, which are crucial for providing affordable housing, even though local authorities up and down the country are, because of course the economic times are tougher, are renegotiating those agreements. It is the antithesis of the Heseltine philosophy. So, I wish him luck in getting the single pot developed. We are strongly in support of it, but you are seeking to confront a century of right-to mentality which seeks to centralise, and at the first sign, as he puts it, of trouble, to wrest powers back. And the point about it is that the publication of the Heseltine report has not yet, at the moment, obviously, led to a turning of the tide. On the contrary, as I say, I will be spending a good part of my next month leading for the Labour Party on the Growth and Infrastructure Bill, which is a micromanaging, centralising measure of precisely the kind which Michael says we need to end if we're going to unleash local creativity. My second set of experiences, actually, I share in common with Michael, because he and I both campaigned hard last year for elected mayors. My own view is very simple, and it's his view. Unless you have identifiable leaders, it's very difficult to vest real political power and economic power in their hands. And one of the biggest problems that we've had in local government, particularly in our big cities, historically in this country, is the very indirect process by which we get leaders. It means that they tend to be weak, they tend not to last long, and they tend, therefore, not to exert much authority. And my sort of party trick on these occasions is to ask people if they can name the leaders of three of the largest local authorities outside England, being Birmingham, Leeds and Liverpool. And I'm not going to do it now, because it may be that it will take us some time to get to all three, but it's very unusual that they can be named. Whereas, of course, Germany, which we've heard a lot about earlier, the lender presidents, everyone knows who they are. They're very big, significant powers. They often, of course, become ministers in the federal government. A wholly different set of relationships between central and local government. Now, the thing about it, coming back to those referendums last year, is that Michael and I did a roadshow. We went round to all of the 12 cities where there were referendums being held. Which included Birmingham, Manchester, Newcastle, Leeds, Bristol, all of the major cities. And rather to my surprise, particularly in the case of Birmingham, all of the referendums went against setting up elected mayors. That was not, in my judgment, so apart from one in Bristol, where they have now elected a mayor, even though there was the example of London before all of these cities, where, in my judgment, and I think generally shared, the introduction of the directly elected mayor has not only produced a very powerful political figure, but a powerful political figure who's therefore been able to exert very significant political and economic leadership on behalf of London. And in the area I know best, which is transport, a whole set of transport infrastructure projects have gone forward, including literally outside this very hall, Crossrail, which is being built at the moment, a £16 billion public-private partnership, which would not conceivably have happened without the mayor. Real partnership between business, central government and local government, including, and this is crucial to why Crossrail is happening, a big contribution by the business community in the form of the supplementary business rate, which is £4 billion of the £16 billion, which would not conceivably have happened without the leadership of the mayor. But despite all of that example before the cities, none of the cities, as I say, except Bristol, voted for an elected mayor. Now, what is my judgment, and I suspect that Michael shares this judgment too, as to why that happened, is because we could not put on the table additional powers that were being devolved to the cities. So the question which we're faced in meetings like this all the time, which is why, what is it you're going to get in terms of additional, whether it be planning, economic, tax, transport, skills, powers. What are those powers going to be? There was a deafening silence. We weren't empowered. I mean, obviously I'm in opposition, so I certainly wasn't, but Michael wasn't empowered to produce a new offer to them. And therefore, I think largely in consequence, the cities voted against. Now, if we're going to move forward on genuine decentralisation, it cannot be on the basis of words and rhetoric. It has to be on the basis of concrete, real powers. And that's where the single pot that Michael talked about is so important. There has to be real decentralisation, not a repackaging of funding that's already going to local authorities. And I think that has to focus in particular on two areas, on skills funding and on transport funding. And the test, I think, of whether it is possible to get real decentralisation and real empowerment of local leaders is whether we can see significant decentralisation in those respects. And that is going to be tough. And my own view is that if we're going to be able to do that, it may be that we need to look really seriously at the city-region agenda and not just at the existing local government structure. Because just as the government has created elected authorities in respect of policing, which as it happens I don't support individual elected officials for individual public services, I think having strategic authorities at the city-regional level which can extend not only from policing, but also take responsibility for skills, for transport in places of the integrated transport authorities, which are largely anonymous entities at the moment. Nobody knows who's on them. They're all deeply, indirectly elected, and skills. That could make a very, very big difference. And how that is done and taken forward over the next few years is critical, and it's going to be a really critical issue for my party as we look at this too. Now, in Michael's report, he places a great deal of faith on the local enterprise partnerships, the LEPs. Now, I'm doing a report for the North East LEP on the industrial future for the North East, and I think LEPs are very important. But the relationship between LEPs and elected local authorities, I think, is going to be absolutely crucial in this regard, because the problem with LEPs is they have no direct democratic legitimacy whatsoever, which is a real problem in terms of devolving serious powers to them. And I'm very mindful of the experience of the RDAs. I would not myself have abolished the RDAs. There were problems with some of them, some were doing a better job than others. But in my experience, it's very, very rarely a good solution to an institutional problem to abolish one set of institutions and simply replace them by another, which is what happened. But the RDAs had high capacity, many of them were highly successful, but they were abolished over a weekend by the present government. Why was that possible? Because they had no fundamental legitimacy to them. And I think this issue, and we have to work with what we've got. The LEPs are there. It's absolutely right to try and make a success of them. But the relationship between the LEPs and elected local authorities, both the existing cities, but possibly also metro cities, is going to be absolutely crucial to taking us forward. Secondly, fostering new industry and new jobs. Let me tell you my story here. Before the last election, I was Transport Secretary. They called me for reasons I can't begin to fathom, the thing controller. In fact, in our transport system at the moment, the Secretary of State for Transport doesn't actually have much say. Most of the railways are privatised. A lot of it, most of it's in the private sector, and it's, you're trying to do a lot by very indirect means. However, one of the things the government does do is it does procure trains. It is the decisions it takes play a crucial role in this regard. A huge industry here. After all, it's one of the industries which made Britain in the 19th century, was the making of trains. A century ago, almost every train in the world was made in this country. Alas, we've got to the deplorable situation which sums up so much of what's gone wrong in British industry in the last 30 years, that as of now, in 2012, there is only one train manufacturer located in this country. It's Bombardier, and it's a country which is owned by the Canadians. Now, you could write a whole book on the deplorable failure of British industrial policy that's got us to this point. However, we are now, because we've now got some sensible policies, we are investing seriously in railways for the first time in a generation. We are, I hope, going to be investing a great deal more seriously as we build, upgrade, electrify lines and build HS2, which is absolutely crucial to linking the economies of the North and Midlands and the South more effectively. We are going to be one of Europe's biggest procurers of new trains over the next 15 to 20 years. So a big issue is, where are these trains made and where is a lot of the R&D done? This is huge jobs, huge multi-billion-pound contracts being placed now and after and over the next 5 to 10 years. Well, when I was Secretary of State, we had a real contract to place. It was the successor trains to the Intercity 125 trains, which were very advanced for their day, but they are now 35 years old. They were introduced in 1976. We're now electrifying some of the lines too, big contract being placed. As Secretary of State for Transport, I was told I could play no part in the procurement exercise, except literally open the envelope at the end on the bidding process and announce the winner. But I wasn't very keen on simply playing that role. My own view is that though there is a new procurement law and all of that, you have to operate within it. There is a very, very big public interest, which is precisely what ministers should be doing before breakfast, lunch, tea and dinner, in seeing that we have a big manufacturing capacity for trains in this country. I'm less concerned about who owns that capacity, and you go with the best ones, and there's now, because we don't have any domestically owned suppliers, the Germans, the Japanese and others are brilliant in terms of R&D, but there's a really legitimate state interest which the state should be promoting in where manufacturing is located. And to cut a very long story short, what we did was we did place the contract with the Japanese, with Hitachi, who's one of the world's greatest train manufacturers, the developers of the first bullet trains and all of that. But we came to an arrangement with Hitachi whereby, in return for this multi-billion-pound contract to build the successor trains to Intercity, they would manufacture them and assemble them here, and they would build a factory here. And that factory is now being built in Newton Aycliffe in the northeast. It's right. Why did the Japanese choose to go to Newton Aycliffe in the northeast? Because you've got Nissan and big green car manufacturing taking place there. They see this as part of a nexus and a cluster of companies in the transport industry they want to build there. Exactly the kind of thing which the state should, in partnership with the private sector, be promoting. But again, to come to the point about how big a challenge we've got as a country, what happened with the next train order after the election, which was the Thameslink trains, which are going to go north-south, very close to here, massive contract that as well, multi-billion-pound contract. What happened to that? That contract, when the envelope was opened, went to Siemens, a great German manufacturer of trains, but the government did nothing to ensure domestic manufacturing of those trains. Whereas what should have been done, if the contract was going to go to a German company, is there should have been an arrangement which the manufacturing would take place here. So this active industrial policy requires a very active and a much more innovative and, to quote France's word, smart state we've got at the moment. Thirdly, and briefly, skills. You will not have an effective industrial policy in this country unless we are much, much better at nurturing and building skills. And it's very important to be self-critical. Michael was self-critical in what happened when he was in government. I'm very self-critical in what happened when we were in government. We did not do nearly enough to boost skills, particularly for those who are not on track to go to university, which is, after all, 50% of the population, who are very, very low skilled for the most part in this country, who do not have a clear line of sight between schools, training and jobs. And if we're going back to the Germans and many of our continental friends, one of the bits of their education, training and industrial system at large they have got right is apprenticeships, skill training, and this fundamentally better and more solid link between schools as institutions and between companies as institutions when it comes to skill training and recruitment. To give a statistic that sticks in my mind as being really deplorable in this respect, last year, in 2012, nearly half of all employers in this country did not recruit an under 21-year-old at all. Now that has got to fundamentally change. It's why we need a big boost to vocational education, we need a transformation of apprenticeships, and we need a fundamentally stronger link at the local and regional level between employers and the education system. Now in Michael's report, in a very important part of his report that hasn't been emphasised enough, he talks about chambers of commerce. And the weakness of chambers of commerce in this country compared to chambers of commerce on the continent, I think is completely right about that. If you go to Germany, one of the main roles that chambers of commerce play is in essentially bringing employers together in respect of training. And an active industrial policy needs to completely reinvent the skills landscape. And instead of the situation we've got at the moment where only 1 in 3 large companies employ apprentices, only 1 in 10 of all companies, and one of the worst offenders in respect of the employment of apprentices is the public sector itself, including central government, we need a reinvention of apprenticeships and training. Now, I believe there's the basis for real consensus between the political parties on these areas, but it has to be consensus based on significant devolution, not just token words. It has to be on the basis of a really radical mindset change in both the public and the private sector, and it needs to be a wholly new and much more active form of partnership before breakfast, before lunch, before tea and before dinner. Thank you very much.